I want to thank you all for coming. I want to extend my appreciation. I know that Assembly Minority Leader Brian Kolb and new Assemblyman Chris Tager are here with us. They have to dash for session, but I just, for my own sake, want to express my appreciation particularly to Brian, but to the Assembly Minority Conference. You know, we win a lot of arguments, just not enough votes. And you know, I come from the school of Assembly Minority Conference, so I'm all about fighting the fight and speaking up when people think you just can't win. But I think I can. So with that, I want to thank you all for coming this morning. I think many of you know that over the course of the last several weeks, I've been talking a great deal about our Accountable Government Act and the concept that someone in Albany needs to take responsibility for the fact that we have now perhaps the most corrupted state government and administration in the country. And I don't say that with a great deal of pleasure. The truth of the matter is, as I think we all know, this governor came into office promising a new day, and instead we have this emboldened culture of corruption that really has sort of corrupted every aspect of decision-making. And it's about time the people of the state of New York stand up and say enough is enough. So a week ago, we unveiled a particular plank of that Accountable Government Act that, should I be elected governor of the state on January 1, will present to the state legislature, really ending the pay-for-play schemes that have not only caused a great deal of embarrassment to the people of the state of New York, but is costing us millions upon millions of dollars. Making clear that those who are seeking contracts or have contracts with the state of New York will no longer be able to contribute to political campaigns. And I think it's an important next step. So today, however, I'd like to talk about another aspect of that plan. I thought a lot about this. You know, there are too many New Yorkers who just have absolutely lost faith in the institutions of government. And I think worse than that, too many of them think that you know, the current course of business is just the way it's going to be, and that maybe they don't take seriously the fact that as citizens we have the ability to regain control of our government and hold people accountable. I think, though, that starts by leading by example. I think a governor establishes the tone. So whether, by the way, it's the last 2 weeks of session or it's the first day in office, a governor sets the tone. And the tone around here is too toxic, too corrosive, too combative, and sadly too stale. The very institutions of democracy in this capital don't function effectively, and I think the people are too often on the outside looking in. So as a commitment to the people of the state of New York, I pledged this when I entered the race, and I'll do it here again today. Should I be elected, pledge to serve only 2 terms as governor of the state of New York, 2 4-year terms, should I have the honor of doing so. And beyond that, I will ask the state legislature to adopt our Accountable Government Act in this plank, and that is to establish term limits for statewide office holders and members of the state legislature. I'll be very candid with you. As somebody who has spent most of my life and all of my adult life in public office, I understand why the public has lost faith in its elected officials. I also understand why the public should be empowered to choose who they wish. But this state government has allowed for the consolidation of power around too few people, and this governor has consumed too much of it. And it is necessary for us to establish term limits and to ensure that this state government have turnover so that the public remains in charge and the people remain in charge. So let me offer to you that I recognize that term limits are not the end-all and not the final solution to reforming Albany. But they are, however, a part of an honest effort to restore accountability and make government right again. And it is about time that we take the action that has been promised us all these years. One of the reasons why New York has a more corrupted government than any other in the country is because there are entrenched people who think that public service is about them and not about the people, that they no longer feel a sense of accountability to those they serve. And ridding the state of New York of the corrupt forces that hold us back, that conspire against New Yorkers, and that cost us a great deal in hard-earned tax money needs to begin, and it will begin on day 1 of my administration. We've seen over the course of the last several years this corrupted and corrosive pay-for-play schemes and scandals that have infected layers of state government and this governor's administration. His very own staff and others traded billions of dollars in hard-earned tax money in exchange for millions of dollars in political contributions to those, frankly, who are seeking to make a buck on the backs of taxpayers. It was only a few months ago that the governor himself said he is the government. Now, I don't know if he meant it or not, but it's an obscene comment for an individual in a democracy to think he or she is the government. Now, he said it, so I'm quoting him. Well, he's not the government. The people of the state of New York are, and the people of the state of New York deserve their government back. Andrew Cuomo, Marc Molinaro are just temporary office holders, and it is our job to be careful stewards of the public trust, and that trust has been broken. The latest case of corrupt dealings, Crystal Run Healthcare has federal investigators looking into the exchange of $25 million in taxpayer grant money to Crystal Run, and the Crystal Run executives gave the governor $400,000 in contributions. That's pay for play as a blatant example, and it needs to end. So as I've said, I'd seek as governor to make pay-for-play illegal in the state of New York. So those individuals or corporations seeking business with government or having contracts with government would not be able to contribute to political campaigns, and politicians would not be able to secure or to receive contribution from those. And beyond that, as part of our Accountable Government Act, the institution of term limits. 2 4-year terms for statewide elected officials and 6 2-year terms for members of the state legislature. Now, this is all part of a package of reform measures that I will absolutely use the powers of the governor to require a vote of the state legislature, and I mean that. It is time that we ensure that the people of the state of New York have their government back. The package includes, and we'll talk more about it over the course of the next several weeks, but an established universal ethics code that every employee, every public official would have to adhere to. An independent, truly independent ethics commission that would enforce that code. A real Moreland Commission, a real one. Hands off by the administration, ensuring that it goes wherever it needs to root out corruption, wherever it is, regardless of party, regardless of seniority or majority. We would seek to end pay for play. And ensure that term limits are established. And there will be more. So I suggest that you stay tuned. But in the meantime, we will continue to call on New Yorkers to finally stand up and say that enough is enough. We deserve better. And we want our government back. And with that, I'd be happy to answer a few questions. If we could start on topic, but I'm very happy. I'm happy, although everyone around me is not happy if we went off topic if necessary. But why don't we start on topic? Any questions on the proposal?
Mark, you said you
Yes, sir.
used the powers of the governor's office to force a vote. What powers are you referring to?
Well, they're not superhuman. They're simply the ability to include policy proposals in budget negotiations. And frankly, I was here when those powers were used excessively by then Governor David Paterson. My suggestion will be, and my intention will be, to ensure that these matters get voted on, yes or no. And frankly, I'd say to the state legislature, up or down. The people of the state of New York deserve an up or down vote. If you want to defeat it, that's on you. But we deserve, and the people of the state of New York deserve, an up or down vote on these reforms, including term limits.
So are you pledging to put that in a
Yes.
budget extended?
I'm pledging to demand and force a vote, no matter what it takes.
Just to follow up.
Yeah.
By putting it in an extender, as you know.
I know.
You could force it into, to make them have to vote on the whole budget for that.
I do.
You're willing to go past the state budget deadline to put it in an extender?
Yeah, listen, somebody had asked of me this question before, sort of alluding to shutting down government. Well, Albany doesn't shut down government. We would have extender bills and continue that process. But yes, I am saying today, and will demand that no matter how long it takes, we will demand a vote on these reforms.
Vote or no vote, you term limit yourself?
Yes, sir. Yeah, I think that it's important to lead by example, and I'd go one up. If the legislature wants to turn down term limits for themselves, which I suggest they shouldn't, I'm more than happy if they establish them on statewide office holders, and I'd hold myself to 2 4-year terms regardless.
And how many terms should a legislator be limited?
We've suggested 6 2-year terms in either house. Karen, did you have a question?
What about county executives?
Yeah. Well, no, it's a good. Yeah. No, I think so. Listen, I actually do support term limits at the local level. I think that that's a decision that local communities should make. I can tell you that I've always thought that 3-4-year terms for a county executive makes sense, and it's not for political reasons. I just, there's a certain amount of power that a governor or a president can consume and assume that needs to be protected against. But for instance, in my county, the city of Poughkeepsie established term limits. That's their right to do so. And I'll tell you that as part of a reform package that we're working on in the county legislature to update our ethics law, we've asked for an up or down vote on term limits as well. Yeah, let me start. Yeah, go ahead. I'll come back to you, Jimmy.
I'm just wondering if, is term limits meant to get at corruption? I mean,
Yeah.
engaged in a lot of corruption in 8 years in office.
It's part of I suppose you could. I wouldn't. I suppose I would suggest to you that it's part of a broader package. But what term limits does is one of two things, right? It demands and forces the public to be more engaged in the decision making and gets rid of individuals who become, quite frankly, disconnected from those they represent. And having that protection, at the very least, is a safety valve. It is not the solution to our problems. I have articulated for you about 5 proposals that I think it conclusively would provide the kind of reform and protection we need, but it is one plank of that. Jimmy?
You had said you'd put it in a budget extender. Would you also put it in your executive budget bill?
Yes.
Okay.
I will present it. Yeah, it will be the first package of bills that I present to the state legislature, and I require a vote one way or another.
But you will put it in your executive
Yes, sir.
budget?
Oh, if they don't vote on it otherwise. I mean, they have, let's face it, right? The state legislature has 30 whole days before, or give or take, before the executive, the governor, presents a budget. They could take it up ahead of that if they wish. But yes, I'd include it in my budget. Anyone? Yeah.
We've got some state lawmakers here, quite frankly, been around since like Prohibition. Well, it seems like it's that way. Are you worried about, and you've worked with some of these folks,
Yeah.
about alienating them, basically saying, some of you guys have been around too long?
Yeah. Well, first, listen, God bless them, and the public's elected them. But it's time that term limits be implemented. And my position is, I'm speaking on behalf of the people of the state of New York who either have a belief that corrupt activities are just the way it is in Albany, or those who have had enough. And so, if it alienates a few people, well, God bless them too.
I'm sorry,
Yeah.
just to clarify, so you wouldn't grandfather anyone?
Well, I think legally you have to. I think you actually have to. You can't sort of retroactively establish term limits. But I suggest if you've served 12 years or longer, you might want to honor the vote that you take. If you vote for term limits, you might want to honor that. And by the way, to Karen's question, I think our county is going to establish 3-4-year term limits for county executive, which would mean someone in my position could serve another. I personally, if I were to lose, could serve another 12 years. That's not the game plan. Adhere by the vote. If you vote for it, adhere to it. Anyone else? Nick? Anyone else on topic? Jimmy?
Yeah, why?
And yes. And
Why 12 years for a county executive, but 8 years for governor?
listen, again, as I said to you, I think that it's the kind of conversation that communities need to have. In my county, the conversation has been that because county executive, in my case, in Dutchess, is a bit of a middle management job, meaning you don't have the same breadth of responsibility or ability to achieve certain goals, that 12 years is the right horizon. But I intend to term limit myself to 2 4-year terms when I'm elected this November.
If you're not elected, do you plan on
I'm not having that. I would uphold listen. I've not made. I intend to win in November. That's my position. But we intend to establish term limits at the county level, and I intend to live by them regardless. On topic, no. Nick, go ahead.
Go ahead, Karen.
Karen, I'm sorry.
Cynthia Nixon was in Albany earlier this week, and she suggested that she would make changes to the property tax cap, making it easier to override on the local level. I'm just wondering if
She's wrong.
What did you make of those statements, and also would you make any changes to the tax cap or how the tax cap works?
Yes, I'd make one important change to the tax cap. I'd seek to make it permanent. With all due respect to Cynthia Nixon and to the governor, I don't know that they truly appreciate the burden of property taxation on New Yorkers. The fact is that this state government forces more of its state spending down onto property taxpayers than nearly any state in America. and New Yorkers shoulder among the highest burden of taxation of any state in America. And when it comes to job creation, economic development, or the outward migration of young people, property taxes, certainly outside of New York City, although there are areas in New York City affected, but property taxes are absolutely the burden that drives down our economic growth and drives up the number of people leaving. We have to make the cap permanent, but we also need to do something that this governor promised and never delivered on. And by the way, I think you know, I served at the governor's request on an effort to try to drive down state spending mandates that force up property taxes, and he abandoned that pledge very early on in his administration. So make the cap permanent and seek to reduce the amount of burden that we shift to local property taxpayers. Go ahead, Nick.
As follow-up, should county governments then, should the state take the burden of Medicaid spending from county governments? That's been one of the mandated things that local governments have complained about. The governor also did the Tier 6 pension reform, and he also did some Medicaid reform beyond the county spending level. So
Yeah, none of that lowered property taxes. Just keep in mind that when we went into when we have the conversation about mandate relief, we actually meant relief, not we're just going to slow the rate of growth. But to your point, I've always supported the state taking back responsibility for Medicaid for two important reasons, not the least of which being property tax relief. And I think if the state takes back a cost, it should be required the tax levy lowers with it, so that communities aren't able to absorb new revenue. That's number one. But number two, the Medicaid system is so burdensome and so complex for those who navigate it. I think I've said this ad nauseum. I think you know. I've benefited from Medicaid services as a kid, food stamps, and now as an adult, my daughter receives Medicaid-related services for her special needs. It is so complex and so complicated. And by the way, having in this case every county in the city administering a separate division of the delivery of those services, it's inefficient, it's ineffective, and it's demoralizing. So I believe not only in the state take back, but really identifying ways to improve the delivery of the service so that we can ensure that those who need the help get it. Karen, go ahead. Yeah.
Should schools still be funded in a large part by the property tax?
You know, that's a conversation. That's a conversation that I think we've had for a number of years. I think we start with the understanding that we've got to drive down property taxes, and then how we get to ensuring schools get adequate revenue. I'm open to that conversation. There are great ideas that come out of this Capitol all the time in that regard. Happy to have that conversation. But the focus, I think, needs to be for all of us reducing the burden on struggling families, small businesses, and farmers all across the state who are overburdened by property taxation.
Whenever people
Mike, yeah.
Also came out in the last few days with his red flag bill.
Yeah.
On that would add to a legislative bill that's already out there that would allow school officials, teachers to report on kids. He also, in that, said he proudly wears his F rating from the NRA, which would be a bit of a shot at you.
I guess.
What do you think of the legislation and also the NRA rating?
I've not read a bill, and I would suggest that I'd like to be able to do that. I've said many times that I think that we need to do better at getting firearms out of the hands of those with violent criminal behavior or severe mental health issues. I support that as a concept. I'd want to know what teachers think. I feel like teachers have enough on their shoulders these days. We overburden them with bureaucracy. I'd like to know what actual teachers, not teacher union leadership, but actual teachers feel about that responsibility, the liabilities that might create for them, and how we can ensure it. But here's one proposal I'd offer to you that the governor, I think, either just forgets or just didn't want to talk about. We have kids coming to and from school, and while the governor, by the way, proposes this idea and flatly says it's not going to go anywhere. He gave up the moment he presented it, so it's not going to happen before the end of this year. He said so. In fact, he's putting no weight behind it. He just wants to use it for political benefit. But kids will go home from school at the end of June. They will start in school in September. Here's my challenge. Put a school resource officer in every building before those kids come back to school. Because no kid, while the legislature debates, no kid should go to a building that isn't safe. Spend the dollars that were dedicated by the state government to approve security measures. Make sure those dollars are spent before September. No kid, when they go back to school in September, should go to school without that kind of security. And frankly, the governor, I don't think, is committed to it. What I do in my county, very important. We provide school resource officers. And by the way, I believe any school resource officer ought to be trained in crisis intervention training and mental health first aid. They ought to be able to identify those kids living with challenges, traumatic experiences, et cetera, and be the eyes and ears and the relationship in the building to alert authorities, alert mental health providers, alert families as to that concern. Put an SRO with CIT training and mental health first aid in every school building before they come back to school in September. That's what we should do, while the governor abandons a proposal that he put no real weight behind anyway.
And
I'm sorry.
In your rating on the NRA better than Cuomo's, what does that mean? Or what's your view of the NRA involved in this discussion?
Well, I think any stakeholder has a right and a responsibility to be part of a conversation. I mean, listen, this governor believes if you disagree with him, you don't live here. You don't belong to live here. 4 years ago, he said if you were right of center, there's no place for you in New York. I believe that anyone who's honest and earnest about the conversation ought to be a part of it. Which by the way, is why when the governor says, "Here, I'm going to," the legislature needs to act instantaneously, because God forbid the public has an opportunity to understand the detail of the bill. They'll revolt against it, and the legislature won't vote for it. He said that several years ago. That's democracy. And if you don't like it, find another line of work. Yeah. Yes.
I'm sorry.
Karen, I'll come back.
Very short amount of time.
I apologize.
I'll be quick.
I won't. That's the problem. They're not concerned about you.
The governor's campaign has branded you as anti-choice. What is your position on abortion? Just for the record?
I do not believe in the expansion to late-term abortion. I'm running to be governor of all of the people of the state of New York. And like his father, I have a personal belief, but I also believe that it's settled law and that we need to do more in the state to ensure that women in particular living in poorer communities have access to prenatal care, access to good quality hospital care and postnatal care. It's embarrassing as a state to find out that we direct more dollars to high-income hospitals, high-income communities with hospitals, than we do investing, ensuring that those who need the tools and resources to make adequate choices for them don't have those kind of resources. That's what I want to be about, ensure that women who are in dealing with difficult choices have the tools and resources to make those decisions. But I accept what the law is, and it's my job, would be my job as governor, to uphold it. But I do not believe in the expansion of access to late-term abortion.
What about the bill that was out, or the amendment, I should say, this week, that would totally decriminalize abortion and also allow non-doctors to perform abortion?
I have hesitation about expanding. I oppose the expansion to late-term abortion, and I have real hesitation about having non-medical professionals non-doctors provide those services. But again, I think the state needs to effectively invest in ensuring that women, regardless of income, regardless of community, have access to appropriate care, and they don't have that in the state. There's a disparity between high-income communities and low-income communities, and if that has any placement in a decision that a woman makes, we ought to address that so that they have the care that they need. Let's do one last. I promise, Karen.
The governor's been going around saying that he's implemented the most effective anti-sexual harassment program in the nation. Wondering what you think about the tenets of that program, and has his record been good?
His record has not been good. The bill itself, I credit the state legislature for moving forward with its adoption. But like everything else, for the governor, it's summed up, I think, with his new campaign logo, which is the check in a box. I mean, he thinks by checking the box, it absolves him of an administration that has avoided confronting those who harass women in his own government. And understand, I acknowledge that it's hard for the person at the top to be responsible for everyone's actions. But these are high-level officials who were identified in the Department of Criminal Justice Services, OPWDD, the Justice Center, identified as harassing women. And when other women came forward as part of an IG report, as other women came forward with a degree of courage to expose this, his administration, understand, an IG report by statute goes to the administration. It's not sent to some department someplace. It's sent to the second floor of the state capitol. His administration decides to move the abuser and to demote or dismiss the women who spoke up. I'll say very carefully, Karen, I think that you saw it in full light when you asked a question about it. It is the kind of arrogance that sends a chilling effect on women, whether they're inside state government or outside of state government. So much so, remember, that he dismissed these women, demoting one to work in a hall closet. It it's not good enough to check a box. That isn't governing. That's not a governing policy, and it's not a way to run a government. There needs to be zero tolerance, and we need to ensure that anyone in a position of leadership in the state government understands the law, understands the rule, and that if they break it, if they don't follow it, they need to find another line of work. In my county, we embrace the concept of start by believing. Someone comes forward, someone who has been abused, we start by believing them in a way to access truth, and we don't dismiss their courage for coming forward. Thanks, everybody. I apologize. I have to apparently go someplace else, like Westchester. Thank you all. I appreciate it.
So you mentioned the pay-to-play stuff. I'm wondering, as county executive, have you ever received any contributions from individuals